While discussing the discourse analysis, we came up with the term conversation structure. We saw that there were different kinds of discourses, or there are different kinds of the speech or patterns, or the written patterns, that we have different rules to analyze them, and we saw a term conversation structure. Now this is what we are going to talk about today in this lesson, lecture number 25 of Linguistics 2, English 504. Now you must be wondering here, by looking at this word, that why do we need to see the structure of conversation? Because it occurs so naturally to us, and we just convey our meanings in any way or in any structure, any form we like, and we get the desired response. But no, sometimes even in conversation we can't get the desired response. We can't get the listener to understand our words. So we do need to analyze the conversation structure as well. How certain words or certain sentences should be uttered by the speaker, so that the meaning is conveyed fully, and the speaker gets the right desired kind of response from the listener. Now, before we talk in detail about the conversation structure, first let's look at the last lecture. We talked about there are many ways to classify the discourses depending on the type of discourse. We may have a written discourse or a spoken discourse, and we have the different rules to analyze them. And then we saw that we can also analyze them depending on the registers. What is the level of formality of discourses, or what kind of discourses are there as far as the professions are concerned, or in different social settings or professional settings, what kind of conversations or what kind of written text we get. So we can classify them and we can analyze them depending on the rules of analyzing those very kinds of texts. Then, according to genre, we can also analyze the text according to the genre, depending on the rules of the genre, depending on the types of the discourses, for example, novel, plays, poetic lines. So every genre has rules, and every genre has a particular kind of writing, a particular kind of conversation even. So we can analyze them in different ways, and we can analyze them using different features and different rules. Then, according to whether it's a monologic uttered by one person, or maybe it's a dialogue, so we have to see both the speakers. We have to see the meanings what both the speakers had there in their minds. So we can analyze a monologue in a different way, a person uttering some words, and a dialogue in a different way. Then we looked at general differences between different spoken and written discourses. And on the level of grammatical intricacies, sentences in spoken discourses are short and simple, whereas they are longer and more complex in written discourse. Lexical density was the second criteria, that spoken discourse is less lexical dense than the written discourse. It has the written discourses have very dense and complicated structures, and thickly words are tightly packed in the written discourses. Nominalization, another factor, that the written discourses have more nominalization, the use of nouns to convey actions like payment, like we had the word consideration. Whereas the spoken, we tend to go for the direct active voice sentences, and we directly convey the actions through the action words or through the verbs, like consider, like pay. So more nouns are there in the written, and more verbs are there in the spoken. Explicitness, another quality. Writing is more explicit than speech. Then we also saw the rebuttal, that it's not always necessary that the spoken is not explicit. Sometimes the spoken also is explicit, and sometimes the written also lacks explicitness sometimes. Contextualization, writing is more decontextualized than speech. Speech is more contextualized. Speech is more focused. When we speak, we look at the context, and we definitely take care of the setting or the context when we are speaking. We can't speak out of context sentences, and writing is more decontextualized. But then again we saw that writing is not always decontextualized. Writing also has to be contextualized. Spontaneity, spoken discourse lacks organization because it is uttered spontaneously. The words are uttered spontaneously, so sometimes even the disorganized sentences, we can get away with these sentences just by uttering half sentences or the fragments or even just the single words, and we can get the response. And sometimes even ungrammatical sentences, they can get us the right response we want because they are spontaneous, they are uttered on spot. But writing has to be very grammatical. You can't get away with the ungrammatical or disorganized sentences in writing. Then spoken discourse contains more uncompleted or reformulated sentences like fragments. Topics can be changed in the spoken but can't be changed in the written. You have to stick to one theme in one paragraph. Speakers may interrupt and overlap. In spoken, you can see the overlapping, and you can even see the interruption and change of themes. Sometimes one person saying something, and in reply the other person puts a question, a different question, and maybe wants to change the topic, change the themes, and that is sometimes done so easily that the conversation continues even with the change of topics and change of themes. Repetition, hesitation, and redundancy, again the qualities of spoken, qualities of conversations, like you see a lot of repetition. In case somebody is asked to speak on spot, he's sent on stage and told to go and express the feelings or express his views impromptu, like on the spot. Somebody is asked to speak on spot without any preparation. So you can see repetitions there in that speech. You can see hesitations and redundancy also. Spoken discourses contains more repetitions, redundancy, because it is produced in real time, on the spot. So on the spot, you can expect some repetitions, some redundancy, some hesitations, even some fillers, even speech fillers, fillers like well, you know. Now these fillers are basically because it is produced on spot, on real-time speech. Features of spoken discourse, we looked at some more features like variation in speed, loudness, quietness, gestures and body language. They accompany the words in oral speech. Intonation, pitch range, stress, rhythm, pausing, phrasing, all these are qualities of the spoken, or the qualities of conversations. You can vary your speed, you can change the you can modulate your pitch, you can put loudness, you can put quietness, you can put pauses just to put more expressions, just to convey meanings in different way. So all these are qualities of spoken or conversation. Differences. There were differences between the two kinds of conversations, the spoken and the written, grammatically, lexically, structurally. You can see a difference in grammar, you can see the difference of words, and you can also see the structure differences between the two. Conversation structure. Now we're going to talk about the structure of conversation today in this lesson, what different kinds of structures you can find in conversation. Now first of all, I would like you to see this long text written here. It is about conversation structure, what happens in that, and what kind of structure we can see. Now I'm going to read this very slowly, and I want you to focus on what I'm reading and note down the salient points of about conversation structure. When we investigate how dialogues actually work, as found in recordings of natural speech, we are often in for a surprise. We are used to seeing dialogues in texts where the dialogue has been carefully crafted, such as the script of a play or the conversation in a language teaching textbook. Such dialogues may be very effective for their purpose, but they're usually a long way from what can happen in everyday conversation. The stereotype is that people speak in complete sentences, taking well-defined turns, carefully listening to each other. The reality is that people often share in the sentences they produce, interrupt each other, do not pay attention to everything that is said, and produce a discourse where the contribution of the participants are widely asymmetrical. Yet, all of this produces a perfectly normal, successful conversation. Now, what is the basic theme of this? The basic theme is that people, they talk to each other, they may be disorganized, they may take their turns, they may speak on their turn, or they may even interrupt each other. Sometimes, if it is in the script, what they are speaking of, the script, if it is written in a written form, it would not really produce a very uniform structure, but still it would be a conversation. Perfectly normal, successful conversation means that still the people would be understanding each other, and the people would produce the desired response, and they would satisfy each other. But when we see conversations which are in plays, movies, and they are written, then there is a proper sequence in that. We are used to seeing dialogues in text where the language has been carefully crafted. Language has been carefully designed and arranged in a proper way, such as the script of the play or the conversation in a language teaching book. Now that is really an organized conversation, because it has been put there to teach the students, it has been put there for the language learners. But yes, in everyday life, when we are talking to each other, we may even interrupt each other. There would be overlapping structures. We may utter some of the words of the speaker. The listener might repeat some of the words. Despite all those interferences, despite all those interruptions, still the speech that is produced, then that is a successful conversation speech, because people, both the speaker and the listener, have understood each other. Now let's see what happens here when we go into the depth of structures of conversation. According to Brown and Yule, there are two main forms of conversation. One is the transactional and the other is the interactional. Now what is transactional? Spoken language used to obtain goods or services, also referred to as the service encounters. One type of conversation is used to get something, when you ask for something. Obtain goods or services, when you ask for services. May I have this number? May I have the price of this good, this item? Now here, you are basically asking for something. That is the transactional, related to business, related to official dealing. Officially, in dealing, you have a different kind of conversation. You tend to use some formal words like, could I speak to Mr. Ahmed? Could I have number? Could I have the number of the reception? No, here you have used the modal verb could. So somewhere in transactional dealings you use some of the words which are formal. But in the interactional, spoken language used to allow people to interact with each other, which features as a fatigue use of language whose purpose is to establish an atmosphere and allow people to socialize. Now here, there is more of an informal conversational structure. You don't go for very formal words when you are interacting generally with people in your social life or in your family life or even in your business life or even in your official dealings. Sometimes when you're talking informally, you are basically not going for those very formal words. Unless you are in a meeting or you are delivering a presentation or you are conducting interviews, there of course it's interactional, but it is again also official. So there are differences here in the transactional and interactional. Even inside interactional, you have to look at the situation, you have to look at the setting where you are using that transactional conversation. So two types here, transactional or service or the service encounters, the encounter where you are asking for some services or you're asking for some goods, and the other one, the general interactional, when you are using conversation for interaction. It could be even a party, informal party, it could be a family gathering, it could even be a meeting in the office, it could even be general conversation going on in the cafeteria. So it depends what kind of interaction it is, and there you tend to use more informal words rather than formal words which you use in the transactional English or transactional conversation, where you are using some of the formal words. Turn taking, another sub area in conversation structure. Conversation structure, you have a very important area, turn taking. Now what is turn taking? As you can see the term, it is quite self-explanatory when you say turn taking, taking turns. Taking turn in what? In talking, in uttering, in speaking. When participants indicate they wish to begin or continue speaking, they use a number of linguistic devices. Now here there is a proper way to take turn. It's not just interruption, it's just not making the other person quiet, it's just not like speaking at any time, but there are certain linguistic devices which you use, certain words, specific words which you use when you want to indicate that you want to talk. May I interrupt? May I speak? If I'm allowed, am I allowed to speak? Or maybe sometimes you go for the non-verbal communication, you raise your hand, or you speak a certain word, excuse me, sorry, please. Now these are certain linguistic devices, certain words which you use when you want to indicate that you want to speak. Fillers and filled or voiced pauses in the form of vocal hesitations. The basic rules here again for the turn taking is that you can use for fillers, you can sometimes well, now these are basically fillers you want when you want to indicate that you want to continue. Voiced pauses, this is a voiced one, it's a pause with a voice in the form of vocal hesitations. Basically they would also indicate some hesitations when somebody wants to say something but hesitates and maybe is thinking whether it's appropriate to say or not. So these indicate that the speaker still wants to continue or the speaker wants to say something else. Repetitions, reformulations or restarts. Sometimes you repeat some words or you repeat some sentences. Reformulation, sometimes you rearrange the sentences, you reform the structures, you rephrase your words because maybe you are not sure whether they are understood properly or not, or maybe you are not sure whether they'll be taken appropriately or not, or maybe sometimes you think that you are being a bit blunt or rude, so you rephrase your sentences. Restarts, you start something and then you pause and you restart, you go back to the first word and you restart. Here all this indicates that you basically want to talk, you want to speak more, and you want to express something else. Discourse markers or utterance indicators, that is words such as well, right, can signal the beginning of a discourse, but can signal a change in direction from what has just been said and the introduction of new information. Now here, sometimes in conversation we use words like well, right, I think, in fact. Now these are fillers. You can call them discourse markers, like utterance indicators. I can repeat them. Well, in fact, right, okay. Now these are discourse markers. You are basically using them to maybe change the topic. You want to change, signal a change in direction. You said something and the other person has maybe put another question and wants you to say something else. You said something and you were not really very happy and you suddenly think that it was it should not have been said that way and you want to change the direction. So what you do, you use some of these discourse markers like, well, I think, in fact. So, in fact, you're right, but. No, these are discourse markers when you want to change the direction. Change your speech. From whatever you said, you want to change the theme. You want to go opposite maybe. So these are basically the discourse markers that are used to indicate that maybe you want to say something else. Just see this point again. Discourse markers, utterances, indicators. That is, words such as well, right. You can add some more words here like in fact, well, you're right, but these are some of more words, and you all of you must have, I think, everybody has some discourse markers, and in conversation has the habit to use those discourse markers. Can signal the beginning of a discourse, but can signal a change in direction from what has just been said. Maybe you want to change the theme. And the introduction of maybe new information, you want to add up to information, what you just said, you want to add up something to it. Turn ending, from turn taking to turn ending now. When participants have finished their turn, they will make this clear, usually with a falling pitch, a question, a discourse marker, or utterance indicator. Words like so, for example, can signal that the speaker is summing up what has just been said. So turn ending means when you want to finish your talk, when you want to finish your speech. You can just drop your pitch, drop your volume. It goes like you start with a low volume, you raise the volume, and then you bring it down. So when you're bringing it down, you're reducing your speed as well, and your pitch is falling. There, it's basically an indicator that you want to finish. Your voice drops at the end of sentence or at the end of speech. So when the voice drops, it's basically an indicator that you want to finish. Another way is to put a question. In the end, sometimes people have a habit to leave a question for the audience. So here, finally, I leave a question for you. This is an example. So, how would you solve this problem? You leave a question and put a pause. So that is the indicator that you don't want to say anything else, and you want now people to talk. So this is another indicator, putting a question to the audience. When you put a question to the audience, in the end, this means it's a turn ending. You have taken your turn, and now you want the audience to take the turn. You may even use a discourse marker or utterance indicator like so or therefore. So in the end, so summing up today's discussion, so here you are basically indicating that you have finished your turn, and now you want the audience to think about it. You have taken your turn, and you have now come to the end of your speech or end of your conversation, or you have come to the end of what you were just saying. So can signal, this can signal, so can signal basically that the speaker is summing up, is coming to the conclusion. You have some more words like I conclude, in the end, so, finally. These are basically the signal words. They're giving signal of the fact that you're now about to finish, and now you're about to give turn to the listener, and now it's the turn of the listener to speak. Participants can show that they are participating and following the utterance of other participants by providing feedback. Feedback is another way to show that you are listening. When you give a feedback, or even through non-verbal language, just nodding of your head, that means you are giving a feedback in a non-verbal language, just through your body language, just through nodding of the head. You are basically giving feedback that you are interested in what the speaker is saying, and you can understand what the speaker is saying, and even to show agreement, that you agree with what the speaker is saying. So participants, they also show that they are participating through their expressions sometimes. Yes, through the use of the word like yes, okay, right. So sometimes you have words as well as the non-verbal language as well as the body language to show that you are participating in the whole process and you are giving feedback. Okay, so turns, adjacency pairs. Now what are these? Adjacency pairs, pairs of utterances that normally occur together and help structure a conversation. Now the pairs which occur together, they are simultaneously, the conversation or the speeches are coming simultaneously, and they help to create a structure. The most commonly occurring adjacency pair is the question answer. A very common example. A question followed by answer. A pair of sentences. One interrogative, the other affirmative, or negative. So this is called adjacency pair. Adjacent pairs, adjacent sentences coming together. Question answer, a very common example of adjacency pairs. A question, as noted previously, can introduce a new topic and indicate a new turn. A question can open up a new area. A question can open up a new turn. A question can open up a new theme. So with new area, you need to continue the conversation. When the answer comes, it completes the conversation. It completes a structure. Question and answer, adjacency pair. WH questions or how questions are fairly open and give the new speaker considerable scope for answering the question. WH question or how questions, they are fairly open. What is your name? What is your opinion? How do you solve this problem? They're very open. You also call them open-ended questions because they give a margin to the listener, to the respondent, to express his views freely. There is no limit to that. Somebody may speak for an hour on what is the opinion, what is your opinion, questions such as what is your opinion on, for example, inflation. Now somebody might speak hours and hours on inflation because the question was very open. What is your opinion? No, somebody might have opinion based on so many facts, so many reasons. So such questions, you also call them open-ended questions. Or maybe another question, how? How do you feel on this situation? How do you solve this problem? So somebody might speak volumes and volumes, somebody might speak hours and hours, might write even volumes and volumes on this. So this is basically the open-ended structure where you give margin to the speaker to say anything, to express views freely. They give a new speaker considerable scope. It's a wide scope. It's a canvas is very wide and gives a lot of space to the speaker to speak, to express views. And then you, for example, you also have the close-ended. In contrast, the close-ended, like, do you believe that the government will take steps? The answer is very close-ended, yes I do or no I don't. So close-ended questions, they don't really give margin. They don't open up the area wide for the respondent to respond. Questions like which the answers may start with yes or no. In closed questions, close-ended questions, you sometimes call them, usually they restrict the scope of answering the speaker, the scope of the answering speaker. Here, the speaker doesn't have a wide margin to speak. He would just reply, or she would just reply with yes I know, or yes it does, or no it doesn't, yes I don't, yes I do, or no I don't. So they don't give margins, so they don't really have a space for the conversation to continue. Whereas the open-ended, they leave a wide margin for the speaker to speak. Now, moving on, we see another kind of questions, another kind of area which in conversation, tag questions. Now, tag questions play a special role in adjacency pairs. How a tag question operates depends very much on the intonation and the context it is used in. Now, what is basically a tag question? A tag question can be very tentative and indicate a desire for agreement or reassurance. Tag question is used for reassuring, for confirming something. He plays a lot of cricket, doesn't he? No, doesn't he is a tag question. He plays cricket, doesn't he? He doesn't play cricket, does he? No, see, if the main statement, if the main statement is positive, the tag question is negative, and if the main statement is negative, the tag question is positive. He plays cricket, doesn't he? He doesn't play cricket, does he? So does he and doesn't he, they are the tag questions, and they have been used for reassurance, for agreement, whether the listener agrees with you or not, or whether you are sure for the reassurance. You want to assure yourself. If the listener agrees with you, you are basically you are sure that you said the right thing. This is a nice color, isn't it? And now if you convert this into negative, like this isn't a nice color, is it? It can also be very assertive device for prompting a response or for directing what the response should be. You're not leaving now, are you? You're not leaving now, are you? You're leaving, aren't you? So basically you're prompting the respondent to speak. You are tempting the respondent to speak. You want to reassure yourself. You are confirming that you said the right thing, that whether what you thought was right. You're leaving now, aren't you? You're not leaving now, are you? See, it's negative question, negative statement followed by a positive tag question, and a positive statement followed by a negative tag question. So what are you basically trying to do by putting a tag question? You want the respondent to respond. You are tempting, you are asserting. It's an assertive style. You want the speaker, you want the respondent to listen to you and also respond, not just remain quiet. So in response to tag question, a conversation definitely develops. The listener would definitely give response, because you are tempting the listener to say something. You are asserting. You've put a question with your statement. You gave a statement and you also put a question, and now you want the listener to respond to you, because you are tempting him, and now the listener can't just stay quiet, because you've also put a question along with your statement. It's very difficult to avoid answering questions. The more urgent a question, the shorter it will be, and more forcefully it will require a response. See, it's difficult to avoid answering questions. Sometimes the questions are such that it's difficult to stay quiet, and you definitely have to answer, like in case of tag questions where you are tempting the listener to speak. The more urgent a question, the shorter it will be. The more urgent the question, the shorter it will be, because you want immediate response. So you can't put a very long question. For immediate response, you'll put a very short question. Isn't it? Don't you? Do you? Aren't you? You're in a hurry, aren't you? So because you want an urgent response, you want immediate response, you're putting a very short question. Aren't you? Are you? Isn't it? Is it? The very short questions, because you want urgent response. Preferred or dispreferred responses. Now let's go on the other side of the coin, that what should be the responses, and what are the right responses, and what are the dispreferred responses. A question is expected to be complemented by an answer. This is considered the preferred response. The preferred response, generally speaking, a question followed by answer. A very ideal agreement, a very ideal pair, a very ideal situation, a question followed by the answer, complemented by an answer. This is considered as a preferred response. Not to answer a question, or to answer at an inappropriate length, either too shortly or at excessive length, or to answer a question with another question, are considered dispreferred responses and tend to interrupt the smooth flow of conversation. Now look at the dispreferred responses, the responses which are not good. For example, not to answer a question followed by silence, no answer. This cannot continue the conversation. Conversation would stop. There may be something wrong, either with the speaker. Maybe he has phrased the question in the wrong way, in a very difficult way, the listener couldn't understand it, or maybe the listener doesn't want to reply, or maybe the listener is just thinking what to say, he hasn't understood, or maybe the listener is not in a mood to reply. So this won't continue the conversation. It is not the preferred ideal agreement, the ideal situation where you get a question and you get the answer and the conversation develops. So conversation cannot develop if you don't reply to a question. The question comes and there is no reply, it's a silence on the other end. There could be even a barrier. There could be something wrong with the mind, or could be something wrong with the medium or channel where the question hasn't reached the listener properly. Maybe there's something wrong with the sound system sometimes when you talk in terms of television or radio, or maybe a speaker addressing public. So here you can include so many things like maybe the psychological situation where there are mental filters, the mental barriers involved, or the psychological barriers involved. So the listener has not understood what the question is, and maybe is still thinking what to say. So here you can include the barriers even, but here there is certainly a break in conversation. The conversation cannot continue. Sometimes we put a question and there is no answer, and we say, well, how can we talk if you don't reply? How can I help you if you don't give me the answer, if you don't reply to my question? So it's basically a two-way flow. If there is no reply to the question, then the conversation cannot continue. Another one, dispreferred response is maybe answer in inappropriate length. A question is short but the answer is very long, or maybe the question is detailed but the answer is very short. Again, dispreferred to a long question, to a question demanding a lot of detail. The listener listens to it and replies just in yes or no. So that would again be an inappropriate response. Or to answer question with another question. You put a question and there is another question. So that is again a dispreferred response. It's not a proper response, and sometimes, you know, when we ask a question, the mother asks a kid and the kid doesn't reply, instead puts another question, and the mother says, that's not the answer to my question, you're just putting another question to me. So that again would be a dispreferred response, and that would not create a smooth flow in the conversation. So the flow of conversation can be affected by the dispreferred responses. They are likely to break the process of conversation because they are not preferred. The ideal situation would be a question followed by a proper answer, open-ended question, of course, followed by a detailed answer, and a closed-ended question followed by a short response. That would be the ideal situation. But if there is no response on the other side, then again it's a dispreferred. Or maybe a question followed by a short question followed by a very long answer, or a question demanding details and the answer is very short. Again, it's a dispreferred situation or a dispreferred response. So all these are situations of preferred and dispreferred responses. Initiating adjacency pairs. Now, adjacency pairs, how they are initiated or how they are generated. Questions are not the only basis of adjacency pairs. You can have other such pairs. A pair can also be initiated with statements, complaints, greetings, instructions. For example, now you see the different examples of greetings. Hello, hi. Hi, how are you doing? Fine, thanks. Again, a pair of greeting. When you greet somebody, the other person replies. That is also a pair. Or complaints. Okay, I have a complaint against your staff. Please sir, tell me the complaint, what is the problem? Now this is again a pair. Again you have statements giving and then the pair is created. How do you solve this problem? I'll tell you how to do it. So statements, again, I want to open the door, can I help you? Again this is a pair. You gave a statement, I want to open this door, and somebody who was nearby said, may I help you, can I help you, or I'll help you to do it. So again this is a pair. So question and answer is not the only way to create these pairs. Where you have different ways to create these pairs. You can have these pairs in the shape of statement and then the response, complaints and then response, greetings followed by greetings. These are different ways to create adjacency pairs. Introductions, for example. Hi, I'm Ahmad. Hello, my name is Ali. So you are greeting, you are introducing yourself. You greet and give your introduction. In response, the other person also introduces himself or herself. This is again a pair. You introduce yourself, you say, my name is Ahmad, the other person says, hello, my name is Ali. So these two are, again, the sentences coming in adjacent places and they are creating a pair which may continue the conversation. The preferred response for these kind of utterances are respectively recognition, replies and exchange of greetings. If the rules are ignored, these patterns are broken. This is called flouting and it immediately creates a response. Sometimes the rules are broken, the proper rules are broken and the dispreferred response comes. If the rules are ignored, these patterns are broken, the proper patterns are broken, and that is the term, the flouting we use for that, and it immediately creates a response. When it's a flouting, when you break the rule, then it creates a response. You break this proper rule, you ask another question and then the answer comes, so response, that creates response. Insertion sequence. How do you insert the things? Insert your speech, insert your words. Sometimes adjacency pairs are harder to identify because they can be separated by intervening utterances. Together they make up an insertion sequence. Shall I wear a blue shoes? You've got the black ones. They're not comfortable. Yeah, they are the best, then wear the blue ones. So you insert speech patterns, you insert different sentences to continue the conversation. Like they are, like, shall I wear the blue shoes, and you insert, you've got the black ones. You are talking, you're not giving the answer. Shall I wear the blue shoes? The preferred one will be yes you can, or no you shouldn't wear them. You're just inserting another sentence like you've got the black ones, just to continue the conversation in a different way. Like you wanted the person B wanted A to wear the black shoes, so it didn't say directly, but maybe didn't want to say it directly that he should wear the black ones, but just inserted a sentence and that he doesn't want the person to wear the blue ones, he wants the person to wear black one. So he inserted a sentence, you've got the black ones. Now this is a very simple statement, but in fact he wants to continue the conversation. He's demanding a response. He is demanding a response that why A is not wearing the black shoes. Openings, closures and repetition. Like all text, conversations have both a beginning and an end. Of course, when you start talking, you do end. There is a beginning and an end of conversation. Like all the texts. These are also signposted by the speaker. See the word signposted here, a very beautiful word which somehow gives us a little hint about a little indication of signs and posting. Now this expression is again used in the world of traffic, or when you have signs posted on the roadside for the drivers to see the sign and then they turn. and they know how far is their destination. So in speech, what are the signpostings? When you want to indicate where you are going, when you want to indicate what is your direction of speech, or what themes are you addressing, or how much have you talked and how much is left. Like in presentations, normally we start with, first I will tell you this, now I come to second point, coming on to my third point, and finally, no, the words which I've used here, first, next point, coming on, finally. These are the markers which tell that the speaker, where the speaker is in the conversation and how much of conversation is left. So basically it's a help to the listeners. The listeners are attentive and the listeners know how much the speaker is left with and what is the speaker talking about now. Is he talking about point 1 or is he talking about point 2, or how much has he already talked, and where the speaker has move to the next point. So they are also called the transitions. They are transitions between different parts of the text maybe, or different parts of the speech maybe. So like all text, conversations both have a beginning and an end, and they are also signposted by speakers. Like another feature of conversation is repetition. Now again, while speaking, the speaker also wants to repeat something, and he would give again a marker. He would again put a sign, or I would like to repeat this, or again, look at it again, or repeating this point. So giving signals is basically very helpful for the speaker as well as the listeners. It would just, the speaker can keep the listeners with him, and together he can take the listeners towards the end of the speech, maybe towards the end of the presentation. So the speech markers or the signal words, they are very important to post the signs. They are the sign postings. It's called a sign posting technique, where you are posting different signs and taking your listeners with you towards the end of the conversation. Cooperation, full understanding. Cooperation means that this is when you are basically using speech markers or using the sign postings, you get the cooperation, the listeners are with you and you are together moving towards the end. Full understanding also, that you are basically helping the listeners to understand it fully. When you use the speech markers or when you use the sign postings, you are making the listeners understand. Otherwise the listeners may be wondering where you are, may be wondering which point you are speaking. Is it point number 1 or point number 2, or it's the last point? So for the full understanding, comprehension of the listeners, the speaker does use the markers, does use the transition words, the bridges, linkages between different parts of the speech, in order to help the listeners understand where the speaker is. Agreement principle. When we are happy for someone to take the lead in a conversation, we do not wish to impose our ego or our point of view. Tacit agreement is a norm, normally signaled by murmurs of assent, short grunts, or at the level of kinesics by nods of approval, feedback. We talked about the feedback just a few minutes ago. When we are happy for someone to take the lead in a conversation, when we want the speaker to keep on speaking, or when we want to show approval of what the speaker is saying, we want to agree with what he is saying, we give short feedback signals. They could be short grunts, maybe sounds, okay, or they could be the non-verbal signals like nodding of the head. You're moving your head like this. So with sound sometimes, yes, grunts. They are notes of the approval. They are murmurs of accent, that you agree with what the speaker is saying. You agree with the speaker saying the right with the speaker. Whatever he's saying is right, and you want the speaker to continue. You are showing approval to what the speaker is saying. The agreement principle does not necessarily mean that the listener agrees with what the first speaker says. It merely signals that the respondent is supporting the first speaker. Now see, here we have a new point, that it's not necessary. In the first point we said, well, notes of approval, he's approving. But then there would be situations where he may not be agreeing fully. So he may be agreeing. Normally it's taken as notes of approval. When you see listeners moving their head or giving short sounds like so this is normally taken as approval, but it may not be approval in all situations. The agreement principle does not necessarily mean that the listener agrees with what the speaker is saying. It merely signals that the respondent is supporting the first speaker. It merely that the respondent he wants the respondent to continue. He may have differences later. He may have differences, but those differences maybe he wants to discuss at the end. For the time being, he wants the speaker to keep on speaking, to keep on talking. He agrees, he supports the speaker that whatever he is saying, that he should continue saying that. He may have differences which may come later, may be discussed later. The principle of politeness. The next principle for conversation. Robin Lakoff in Language and Women Place pointed out 3 maxims that are conventionally followed. Together they make up the politeness principle. Don't impose, give options, make your receiver feel good. Empathy. Put yourself in the place of the receiver. Don't impose yourself. Don't show an imposing attitude. Don't really be very bossy. Don't be very assertive. Give options, give margins to the speaker. Give him limits, give him some space to talk. That is the politeness. That is courtesy. A person who is polite would always be a good listener. A good listener is polite because it's giving margin. If you are not a good listener, people will not listen to you. You can't be a good speaker, because listening and speaking, they go together. If you're a good listener, you are considered very polite. You must also give margin or options to the speaker and let him speak. You should listen to it carefully. In the end, when it's your turn, take your turn and speak. Make your receiver feel good. Keep your receiver at a comfortable place. Let the speaker speak. Don't create tension for your speaker by not agreeing, by interrupting. So don't interrupt, let him speak. That is a very important principle of conversation, and a very, very important principle if you want to continue the conversation. These maxims can explain and describe how many utterances carry no information, but they have the function of facilitating social interaction. Sometimes some conversations are just for social interaction. Some conversations are just for facilitating people, for making people happy. They may not have any serious purpose behind. They may not have any serious information behind, but they are just for social interaction. They are just for facilitating people. They are just for helping people. They are just to make people happy. Even in social gatherings, in parties, you just go and introduce people and you just praise their dress. For example, the ladies, they start praising their dresses, and sometimes they are just talking meaninglessly, and there's no serious purpose behind that conversation. But some ladies, they are doing that to facilitate others. Even in our official gatherings in offices, sometimes we don't know the people, and we would just go and talk about and praise them. That is, the purpose could be just for facilitating, just for social interaction. So for social interaction, if you sometimes have to be polite. You don't have to impose yourself. These maxims, they can explain and describe how many utterances, sometimes so many utterances, they carry no meanings. But they have been done, they are made just for politeness. They are made just to continue the conversation, just to facilitate others. Face saving or face, another very important factor for conversation. Linguistic politeness also involves the concept of face. Face is your public self-image. How people think of you, your image in the public, that is your face. It is the emotional or social sense of self that every person has and expects everyone else to recognize. You have your social sense of self, you believe in yourself, you have your inner personality, you have your image, and you want to be recognized by that image. You want people to recognize you. You want to keep that face, you want to keep that image. That is George Jules. In the study of language in 1985-1996, he says that yes, face is important, everybody has an image, and everybody wants that people should recognize that person and and respect that face and respect his image. Now in face again we have sub-points like face threatening acts. Speech that represents a threat to another person's face is called a face threatening act. Any sentence, any speech that is against somebody's image, that spoils or mars somebody's image, that is face threatening act. Any sentence that might spoil somebody's image, that is a face threatening act or face threatening speech. Sometimes even in our everyday life, in our social life, in our professional life, we are very careful in quoting people. Sometimes we utter a sentence and that might go against somebody's image. Somebody's image might be spoiled by our utterance. So such utterances are called the face threatening acts. For example, using a direct speech act to make someone do something. In such circumstances, you're acting as though you've more social power than the other person. So when you are using direct speech acts, sometimes you are not really very careful and you may even threaten somebody's face, somebody's image. If you do not actually have that power, it makes your speech act as a face threatening act. Sometimes without power, sometimes without authority, you utter such sentences which might spoil somebody's image. So there you have to be very careful in utterances, because your one sentence can spoil somebody's image. Then you have the face saving acts. An indirect speech act is an example of a face saving act. These are meant to reduce potential threats to other person's face. For example, if I formulate a direct speech act as a question, I remove the assumption of social power. I appear to be inquiring about ability and not issuing an order. So here, sometimes we use the indirect speech acts, we put a question that is he really a good professional? No, indirectly you are basically putting a question and using your indirect speech act in order. Here you are not imposing your authority, you are just inquiring and you want to save that person's face. It's not a face threatening here, it's a face saving fact. So here the other person, when he replies, he gives the opinion, you are not in a danger. Your conversation won't be taken as a face threatening conversation. It would just be a face saving acts. So for face saving, it's better to utter indirect sentences instead of just imposing authority and saying directly like he's not a good worker or he is an inefficient person. That is a face threatening. Or I think he's a very inefficient person. Again, that is face threatening. But if you put an indirect speech act that what do you think about his professionalism, or is he very professional, is he hardworking? Now these are the inquiry styles for the face saving. You are saving the face of that person, you are saving the image of that person, you are not threatening the image of that person. Then you have the negative face. Face saving acts can emphasize a person's negative face or positive face. Negative face is the need to be free from imposition. Many face saving acts in everyday conversation preserve the other person's negative face. because the speaker signals a wish not to impose on the other person. Here, when you are giving the indirect speech acts, you are not threatening somebody's face, you are basically saving somebody's image. So you should be careful in talking. When you are passing statements in your offices, you should be very careful in talking or mentioning about somebody, because maybe your one sentence can spoil the image of that person in the office. So you have to be very careful in uttering, you have to be very careful in passing statements about people. Now here we have a very small example. I'm sorry to bother you. If I could just trouble you for a second, if I could just steal a minute of your time. Now here you are not imposing yourself. The other person can reply in any way. You're passing a face-saving situation, not a face-saving sentence, not a face-threatening sentence. Again, you have the positive face. We already talked about, I couldn't agree with you more. Let's do this. You and I have the same problem. That is positive face. You are giving a face-saving act. A face-saving act that emphasizes the person's positive face will show solidarity and draw attention to a shared goal or view. That is face-saving. When you say, we share, that is face-saving. You are saving the other person's face. We share the same views. I couldn't agree with you more. Let's do this. That is a positive face. And you and I have the same problem, or we share the same problem. So that is positive face. The rules of conversation were first formulated by Paul Grice as the cooperative principle. This states that we interpret the language on the assumption that a speaker is obeying the four maxims known as Grice maxims of quality being true, quantity being brief, relation being relevant, and manner being clear. Conversation implicature. Grice argues that although speakers usually choose to cooperate, they can also refuse to abide by that principle, or in other words, flout it. You may not always get agreement. Sometimes speakers, they disagree with each other and they don't reply to each other's questions. If a maxim is deliberately broken, it is normally done so to achieve a very specific effect and communicate a specific meaning known as conversational implicature. In other words, the special meaning created when a maxim is flouted. Sometimes conversational implicature is created, like you achieve a very specific effect and communicate a specific meaning. A maxim is broken, a rule is broken, and this is done just to for some other purpose, just to achieve some other specific purpose, and that is called conversation implicature, where you are again tempting the respondent to respond. You break that rule just because you want you want the other person to get the to reply, and you want the conversation to continue. Summing up today's discussion, what do we have? What did we discuss today? See the summary. Conversation is a flexible text negotiated between the various participants in a conversation. It's a flexible text, a text which can be flexible, which is not rigid, because if the speakers are rigid, conversation doesn't continue. Speakers have to be flexible. Negotiated between various participants in a conversation. People have to be flexible. The conversation has to be flexible. That is how the conversation can continue. With the knowledge of Grice's maxims, the speakers and listeners support and evaluate each other using known building blocks, adjacency pairs and turns. Two very important features we studied today: adjacency pairs, the question answers, or maybe you are the greeting patterns, or you are just going and asking questions, or and you get the answer, or you greet somebody, you get the response. And turns, turn taking. You know your turn, and you take your turn in speaking. You know when it's your time to speak, and you also give turn to the other person to speak. You give signal word that you are about to end, so that the other person should be ready to speak. These are two very important features that we discussed today. No fluency features like voiced gap, non-fluency features like voiced gap fillers. When you have fillers using fillers like okay, well, right, you know, these are fillers, conversation fillers. So they are non-fluency fillers. They are when there is no fluency, when there's a break, a pause, that is where you fit in a filler. And it's basically a signal that maybe you are wondering what to say next, or maybe you're wondering what you said was right, or maybe you want to add to the conversation, you want to add to the knowledge. Openers and closures. The next thing we discuss today, that there are signal words to start your conversation, and there are signal words to close the conversation. So opening words and closing words. Words like starting, in the start, okay, listen, be quiet, your attention please, hello, these are opening. And closure, so, in the end, therefore, concluding, my words, finally, these are the closures. So you do have signal words, you do have indicators which tell when you want to start and when you want to finish. Discourse markers to signpost the structure. You have the discourse markers to signpost where you want to finish, where you want to stop, where you want to continue, and where you want to finish. This signposting causes participants to be aware of the conversation structures. When you know the signposting, when you apply the signposting technique, it's very people with traffic, they are very familiar with that. That you just imagine you are driving on the road and you are interested in how much more you have to drive and how much far is your destination. You just see the roadside signals. You see Karachi 2 kilometers, Lahore 6 kilometers, turn right, U-turn. You know, these are for the assistance of the drivers. They are signal words. They are signpostings. The signs have been posted at various places for helping the drivers. In the same way, in presentation or in conversation, people use signposting technique. They use different words like starting, going to my next point, and my next point would be, all right, now let's discuss this. Finally, closing up. Now, these are basically the transition words, the bridging words, which bridge or which link one part with the other part. Now, these are basically indicators of the movement of conversation, enabling the smooth progression from topic to topic and from speaker to speaker. Even in speaker to speaker, okay, Mr. This, okay, Mr. Ahmed, now, right, let's listen to Aslam. So all these are basically the linkages, how the one conversation moves to the next conversation. So all these are basically the fillers, the discourse markers, which indicate that the conversation is to move to the next part. And this creates a smooth flow of conversation. At the same time, conversation also observes the politeness principle, which in turn involves issues of face. Again, the maxims that you have to be cooperative, you have to be polite, and for politeness you don't have to assert, you don't have to be rude, you don't have to interrupt. Just adopt the face-saving acts, not the image spoiling acts. You should use such conversation which saves the face of people. You have to be careful in passing comments about people. You have to be careful about talking to people, about inquiring about people, that you don't spoil the image of people. Because image is what everybody has, and everybody cares for the image, everybody cares for the face, and everybody desires that the face should be kept, face should not be spoiled, or the image should not be spoiled. It should not be a negative image of the face, there should be a positive image of the face. So politeness is a very important principle. One has to be polite, one has to be empathetic. Put yourself in the receiver's place, put yourself in the speaker's place, and then imagine that if somebody interrupts you, how would you feel? So interruption is again discouraged in conversation. For the smooth flow of conversation, there should be empathy, and people should be good listeners. Only good listening can help you to be good speaker, because if you are not a good listener, people would not listen to you. Now, this was what we had as far as the conversation is concerned, as far as the structure of conversation is concerned. And in the coming lecture we'll also be talking about the analysis of conversation, how the conversation is analyzed. There are different ways to analyze the turn taking, the pairs, how the pairs or the coherence, how the coherence is analyzed, or how the turn taking is analyzed, and how to give turns to people, and how to assess the turns, or how to assess the situations in which the turn taking is progresses. So till the next lecture we will be talking about the analysis of conversation. So this is what we had about the conversation structure, what are the different structures of a conversation, and now in the coming lectures we'll be looking at analyzing conversation, how the turn taking is analyzed, and how you imagine that it's your turn to speak, for example, and it's the other person's turn to speak. So turn taking again, and the adjacency pairs will be looked at in detail, until the next lecture where we'll be talking about these things. It's goodbye from here.